So let me ask you first of all, you and I are of a similar age, shall we say. I remember the first time I saw an osprey. When was the first time you saw an osprey?
First time I actually remember seeing an osprey was in the early 1970s when, as a family, we went on holiday up to the Highlands of Scotland, and I remember nagging Mum and Dad that we had to go to Lochgarten to see the ospreys.
Yeah.
And I was really lucky because that year, I remember it was the day after my birthday, so it was the 23rd of August, which is very late for the ospreys,
Yeah.
but they were still there that year. They'd arrived late, they laid their first egg late, and there were still 2 chicks, I think, in the nest. And I remember we arrived late morning and we were supposed to go then to Aviemore for lunch, but we didn't leave till 4 o'clock because I insisted that we stayed until I saw one of the adults come back with a fish.
Yeah.
And I did. I saw one of the adults come back with a fish, and both chicks then immediately sat up and began to feed, and it was memorable. It's one of those bird watching experiences that I will remember until I die. You know, it is
Fantastic.
a memorable day.
Yeah.
But the first osprey I saw in Wales was not long after that, actually, and bear in mind this is at a time when there were, I'm not quite sure exactly how many, probably 40, 50 pairs in the UK, and not that many passed through Wales then. But I grew up in Lake Vyrnwy, Llanwddyn, was a big reservoir, but once every 3, 4, 5 years an osprey would pass through, and I'd miss them every time. And I was out on my bike and I was right down the far end of the lake, and I saw this big bird perched up on a dead tree, and then I got my binocs out and I sat there, and it was an osprey, and it was the first one I ever saw in Wales.
Yeah.
And again, that was, you know, one of those memorable times because he was on my home patch.
So you knew the story of the ospreys in Scotland, extinction, decades and decades of no ospreys at all. You were there when there were 30, 40 pairs, just starting off basically. Fast forward to Alwyn and Vyrnwy.
Yeah.
You saw an osprey. Did you then think, well, hang on a minute, are we in the same position as Scotland here? Will ospreys come back to Wales, or do you think that was just a complete one-off and you thought, well, I'll probably never see one again?
Do you know, I never thought at that time that I would live long enough to see them nesting in Wales.
Yeah.
It just didn't enter my head at all, because we all knew that ospreys passed by Wales. You know, we had the odd bird passing through. The Elan Valley was a good area, some of these estuaries. Conwy Valley was another area where they passed through most years, but invariably then it was just the odd bird, sometimes 2 if you were very lucky. And it wasn't really until I started working for the RSPB in 1985, and we had a pair one year, must have been a young pair, settled in the Elan Valley for about 2 months.
Yeah.
And I remember the office, you know, we were all on high alert just in case we had a nest, just in case they actually bred there. Unfortunately they didn't. They stayed around, they fished, but they then moved on. But that was the first time that I remember thinking, hold on now, there's no reason why these birds shouldn't nest in Wales.
Yeah.
But you know, it was a long time, 20 years after that the first pair actually nested here.
Well, let me ask you to fast forward a bit more again then, to this century now, early 2000s. A lot of excitement, a lot of people on tenterhooks, 2003, 4, 5. What do you remember? So it's a decade ago now. What do you remember of those times? Because suddenly no ospreys breeding at all for centuries, just like London buses. 2 came at the same time, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right, yes. It was a funny year, wasn't it? Because I remember talking to a few of the key figures, people like Kelvin Jones, and he said, hey, you know, there's a pair of ospreys, you know, and keep it quiet. And I said, okay, yeah, I will. And of course, the next thing I knew, it had been broadcast everywhere because the decision had been taken, rightly, I think, to tell everyone that it was there and to ask for volunteers to come forward to warden the pair, because word would have got out, you know, people would see them carrying fish back and forth. And it was a while later, it was a month or 2 later, that a fisherman from Birmingham picked up a bird in the Severn Valley carrying a fish, back to what he thought was a nest.
Yeah.
That was then reported to the local wildlife trust, Montgomeryshire Wildlife Trust, of course, and then it was only after that that the nest was located, and they took the decision, rightly thinking where the nest was, to keep that very quiet.
Yeah.
So all the attention, all the excitement was focused on the Glaslyn pair.
Yeah.
Whereas the Welshpool pair was kept very quiet, and of course, as we now know, disaster, because I had a phone call from Aled Jones, who was one of the watchers. They couldn't get hold of anyone from RSPB. Both birds were up in the air, creating a hell of a fuss, and I said, listen, Al, if both birds are up in the air, something's wrong.
Yeah.
You need to get someone down there. And they were panicking because no one was licensed there.
Yeah.
And eventually someone did go, and of course both chicks were dead. But thankfully the Welshpool pair reared one young that year, and we had high hopes for that pair as well. It's only as the crow flies 2.5 miles from my home.
Yeah. You could hear them from your
I
home.
could virtually hear them from my home, and the shame of it is it took a fisherman from Birmingham to find the nest. You know, so but they reared one young that year, and we had high hopes, you know, they'll be back next year. Something must have happened to one of the pair, because one bird came back, the other one didn't, and they've never nested in that area again.
Yeah. Now, I remember a couple of years later, around about 2006, you and I were talking in the Glaslyn at the time. I think you were doing one of your Iolo's Welsh safari programs, and you and I were talking. Only one pair in Wales at the time. They'd only started to be successful in 2005. I think they had 2 chicks then. And you asked me a question, you know, where would you think we'll be in a few years' time? And I said something like, you know, well, hopefully, you know, from one pair we'll have 2 and 4 and 8 and 16 and so on and so forth. And we all talked about it and happy ever after. And of course, we stopped recording, and you said to me, well, something like "Padam ali cachiam," which politely kind of means I don't think so, shall we say. And here we are, you know, 8 years on. There's a handful of ospreys in Wales now. For the first time, I think I'm right in saying, in 2014, 10 chicks either have or very quickly will fledge out of nests in Wales this year. How does that make you feel, going back over to the 70s and seeing those ospreys in Scotland, a handful of pairs now? How does that make you feel as a bird person, and does that fill you with optimism going forward?
Yeah, it does. You know, it's probably the most dramatic bird news in Wales this century. And okay, we're only 14 years into this century, but it is dramatic news. If you were to go back just 20 years, because of the way that ospreys breed, they expand very, very sort of slowly. I think even then people said, well, they will come to Wales eventually, but it won't be in my lifetime. And you know, I'm middle-aged, I'm not that old, but I've seen, you know, up to a handful of pairs now nesting in Wales, and I'm very confident. As you say, 10 chicks this year. You know, who knows, in 5 years' time it might be 20 chicks, and once they start to pump out young pairs like this, then there's no reason at all why we couldn't have 30-40 pairs in Wales in 25 years. No reason at all. The habitat is here, the estuaries, the rivers, the lakes are here, and the willingness is here too. Even talking to most fishermen, some of the inland lakes here, you know, I know quite a few fishermen, and they love seeing ospreys coming down and taking fish. They don't begrudge them at all, and I think that's important. So it fills me with pride, it fills me with hope, especially at a time when a lot of us are banging on about the destruction of the countryside, about numbers of birds, numbers of butterflies, numbers of bees going downhill rapidly. It really is nice to be able to report on a species, enigmatic, charismatic bird that's on the increase in Wales.
Yeah, you've answered my penultimate question, I think, which was going to be me asking you somewhere we're going to be in a few years' time, because we're not in a situation, are we, like the red kite, for example. The red kite is a extreme opportunist. I can't even say that word.
Opportunist.
Thank you, Iolo.
Yes.
A Welshman telling you a Welshman how to speak English. A fantastic bird of prey. Just over 1,000 pairs in Wales now. Completely different ecologies and biologies. The ospreys is not like that. So to hear you say we'll have dozens of them here in a few years is excellent news. So that brings me to my last question then, which is non-osprey related really. I and many of us listening to this recording now heard you talk about the State of Nature report that came out a few months ago, which was a UK-wide multi-organisational research into the state of nature, how species are doing. Are they up? Are they down? Are they level? And going back over many years, decades in some species. Birds of prey, are they doing well? I seem to remember when I was a kid, you've had the odd kestrel, the odd buzzard, but that's about it. But Alwyn, who's sitting next to us here, he sees marsh harriers every winter here, and I see more and more birds of prey. And birds of prey, presumably, are an indicator that the health of the ecosystem is getting better. Is it good news?
It's mixed news.
Yeah.
I think on the whole, over the last 30-40 years, birds of prey have done well, on the whole. Going back to when I was a young lad, marsh harriers, you had a handful of pairs, all of them in East Anglia. Now you've got hundreds of pairs nesting as far north as Inch Marshes. And then you've got buzzards have expanded east right across England. I was on the South Downs last week and buzzards were 10 a penny there, ravens were there too. Sparrowhawks have recovered, peregrine numbers have recovered, although there's been probably a decline in Wales over the last 10 years for natural reasons, I think. But if you look at the wider picture for birds of prey, you take England for example, last year not a single successfully nesting hen harrier in the whole country, whereas there should be 300 pairs, and that is, people pussyfoot around this, that's due to persecution. There's no two ways about that. The same goes for golden eagles, 440 odd pairs. We should have golden eagles in Wales. We should have them in Wales. White-tailed eagles likewise. This year, the first white-tailed eagle to be reared in the east of Scotland in a wild nest has disappeared. Poisoned, shot, whatever, it's gone. Those kinds of things shouldn't happen. This is the 21st century. This is not Victorian times, and it's diabolical that it does. And I have to say, to get political for a moment, talking about wider countryside issues, I think personally that at the moment we have the worst government I have known from a conservation point of view. They pay no heed to wildlife and wildlife conservation whatsoever. It's all about planning and development. And I would say the same for the Welsh Assembly government as well. I think we have an awful Welsh Assembly government. People who know me know that I hate politicians anyway, doesn't matter what party. And I'm not being pro-Labour, pro-Tory, they're all, as far as I'm concerned, they're all vermin. But if you think of some of the key decisions that have come out, they've been pushing to cull buzzards. We have also the Natural Resources Wales, this new body, which is a very weak, very ineffective, very inefficient body. We now have the go-ahead for an M4 relief road across the Gwent levels, which will destroy 5 SSSIs. We have planning in for a race track up the top of the valleys, which will destroy thousands of tons of peat, for example. So there are so many examples in Wales and UK-wide where the Welsh Assembly, where the UK government should be opposing them, and they're not. They're pushing them forward. But to come back to birds of prey, we have a lot of bird of prey persecution. We also have concern about one or two species, and we're not quite sure why they're going down. Merlin is one. It's become a very rare bird now in Wales.
Haven't seen a
Kestrel
single one
is the other one. On motorways, you used to see, even 10 years ago, common birds. I now see far more buzzards on motorways than I see kestrels. So, yes, ospreys are doing well. Yes, red kites are doing well. Yes, and the whole buzzards are. And you could pick out 3, 4, 5 others. But we've still got a handful that are not doing well that should be doing far better than they are. So, simple answer is it would be, if it was a school report, it would be a mixed one.
Thank you, Iolo. You probably know I talk or I write on blogs quite often about complacency, and I feel that complacency is a real threat to conservation these days. People think things are doing well, they see more of this, more of that, they don't take proper heed of things like you say, and unless we get rid of this complacency and look at the facts and the figures and concentrate on things properly, because we do, people, organisations, RSPB, the Wildlife Trust, they are doing good work, but we need to stop being complacent and look ahead and put action plans in place, including political action plans, and make sure the future is bright for all of us, including our children and their children.
It is, absolutely, and we're very arrogant, I think, humans, you know, in that we think we're above everything. And what we need to wake up to is the fact that we're not. We're just a small part of everything, and if we damage everything else, then we're actually, in the end, damaging ourselves. And if we do away with, you know, if we see declining birds of prey, if we see declining butterflies, declining moths, plants, fish, whatever it is, there's something seriously wrong, and that will in the end come back and bite us on our bottoms.
Iolo, it's been a surreal experience talking to you in English. It's probably the first time I've ever spoken to you in English, but can I thank you for coming along today? It's been a pleasure talking to you again. We've all enjoyed you being here, and please come back and see us again. And before I forget, even though it's middle of July, everybody listening at home, a very Merry Christmas to you all.
And can I just quickly at the end say congratulations to all of you, volunteers all around and workers around the table here. You've done a fantastic job. It's the first time I've had a look around the new 360-degree centre here. It is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. So well done all of you, because I know that it wouldn't have been done without everyone here, volunteers and workers chipping in. Well done. Llongyfarchiadau mawr.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.